Hi, everybody. This is Gabriel Hartley, your professor in English 2100 this semester, and I wanted to give you a kind of video version of my own introduction to myself, the thing I've been asking you to do in your blog entries, and I'll probably post a link to this in my blog entry as well, which you can find in the same place as yours in the Blackboard folder, but a lot of my blog is the website we've been using all along and will continue throughout the semester. But in any case, a little bit about me. First of all, as I've mentioned to a few of you, I know some of you are new to online classes. Others have had quite a bit of experience with it. This is my first semester teaching online here, and I'm really excited about that possibility because it opens up a lot in different areas I've been interested in years, and projecting to the future of how I can, for instance, become more mobile and yet remain a professor, remain connected to my students through the internet. And but one of the ways this came up was in August 2nd of 2017, I suffered a stroke, and this is my first course back. Since then, I've been on medical leave, and I'm still on partial medical leave right now. But this was a chance to get back into the swing of things and to be able to share what I've been learning in the meantime. So even though I've been home initially, I couldn't read. Even the nature of the stroke affected my ability to process the environmental field of all kinds. And part of the difficulty for me remains maintaining stamina while I'm working with people individually. So if we were in a conversation, for instance, if we were in the classroom, I'd have about 20 good minutes, and then that would be pretty much it. And I'll be working on increasing that stamina as things go on, but it's still a process. So in the meantime, we're in an asynchronous connection here, which works out best for me at the moment, and presumably for a lot of you. I'm sure some of you have jobs, some of you have compelling schedules that make it necessary for you to be doing an online class in the first place. Hopefully, your choice of this one was due to your interest in the material, since it isn't timing. There's no specific schedule factor related to this course over any other online course. And I wanted to say I'm excited about that too. Yes, I chose to wear my Black Panther shirt today, which I got a couple months ago, anticipating our class together. And that's a sign of where things are shaping up for me in terms of the material for the class. Originally, I've taught the class in person, face to face, in time, synchronously, a couple times in the past, and I had used, in fact, I have a flyer for it. I didn't plan for this, but it happens to be right here. I had uh, used Alice in Wonderland as the kind of organizing theme. And originally, that was kind of accidental. I just thought that the title Through the Looking Glass, for instance, uh, uh, pretty much captured all of my teaching, all of my research, all of my experience in life right now. In fact, I was teaching this obviously before my stroke. But interestingly, since then, since I've had damage to the brain, to the perceptual field and the organization of input, um, the question of consciousness has taken on a whole different level for me of understanding and integrating all these experiences as part of the process I'm working on right now. And I'm still through the looking glass in many ways, but I was before that. This turned out to be what's often referred to as a fortunate fall. It wasn't anything I had planned. I did have some interest in online courses, but wasn't actively pursuing that. I didn't have any particular reason to. And now I find that, especially because I've had a year and a half out of classes, that I spent all of that time online through various media, specifically Facebook, which is one of the reasons I decided I'd have us, as a class, have a Facebook page, a group page that we would use together for communicating. By the way, I posted a few things, preliminary things on there, but you're free to post on there, and that's actually the whole purpose of it. It does give me a way to communicate a few things if I'm online and I come across a post I think is fitting for the themes we're discussing and some of the issues we're looking at. Uh, that's a good place for me to give you a quick kind of anchor into the popular culture, given that this is a course in popular culture. So please, if you are interested in doing so, go ahead and certainly visit the page, but feel free to post, feel free to interact. Um, I do caution you and ask you, of course, to maintain the usual respect for others in the posts. We don't want ad hominem attacks in particular, which is very, very common in, especially in the Facebook world, but in Twitter and in politics, in television and so on. So that's sort of the dominant mode of interaction, I would say, these days is ad hominem. And what that means, that's a Latin phrase, I think literally means to the man, but it's considered a propaganda technique in which you deflect attention away from the actual issues of an argument and attack the person rather than the policy that the person might be presenting or representing. And we see this everywhere. Name calling is one particular negative version of that, but I want to also suggest that ad hominem works in presumably positive ways too, because so and so is ABC blank, therefore that person carries more authority, is more believable. This argument is more worthy of our respect than had the person been, XYZ and so on. I'll actually do a little video on ad hominem and post it in our Facebook page. Now, a little bit about me. That's right. That's what that was my purpose here. I also wanted to say more about the class. This is my, let's see, 20th, I'm finishing my 20th year here at OU. I taught at Ohio State for quite a while. I was a middle school and high school teacher in English, creative writing, and history for 5 years in a couple prep schools in New Mexico and Kansas, as well as some Kansas City public schools. And I had my certification in secondary English in 1980, which was part of my major as an undergraduate. Also got that secondary certification in New Mexico and in Kansas. By the time I got to Ohio, I was pretty much on full stream university track, so I never pursued that here, but I was actually hired. Well, anyway, I won't go into that. I've been here in Athens for 20 years, and Athens is very much my home. Although I've lived 10 years in New Mexico, I went there for graduate school, and then, as I said, stayed and taught as a high school and middle school teacher for 3 years after that. And that had a big impact on me and who I am, what I do, what my interests are. To give you a sense of my research history, my publication history, when I was at New Mexico, I wrote my dissertation, and it was then later published as this book here, Textual, Politics and the Language Poets, which came out from Indiana University in 1989. It was the first book-length study of this particular avant-garde group of political poets, situated mostly in um, Manhattan and the San Francisco Bay Area, with some people in Canada also involved. And then so that was the first, oh, I'd say decade of my work. When I came here, that was still one of my primary focuses. I don't have the second book here. The second book was The Abyss of Representation, and the subtitle was Marxism and the Postmodern Sublime. And that was continuing my study in poetry. In that first book, I was really interested in pursuing how do language structures affect our perception of reality, and how do they smooth the gears, we might say, lay out the tracks for us in social uh, interaction with one another. And so my second book was following through with that, but in more specifically so-called theoretical area. Critical theory was my other primary area of focus in my exams and PhD work and in my publications. And so that was again following through on the question of representation, uh, uh, by which I meant representation as a kind of cognitive fact and function. So I was looking at philosophers, political philosophers, philosophers of consciousness, uh, um, and so on, from Immanuel Kant initially in the 1790s up through the present, which at that point was up into the mid 90s. So that was, I would say, the second phase of my work was that deep entrenchment into the kinds of questions about how does language work, how does consciousness work, how does our reality become shaped for us by language systems and so on. Then I had what I guess I would say is a third area of interest, and you'll see some of that. You'll see some of all of this in our class together. But the third area was probably, for the best shorthand, would be multicultural studies, and that took the form specifically of an interest in and interaction in circles related to Chicano culture, Chicano poetry, excuse me. And as a result of that, Chicano spiritual traditions, and by Chicano I and anyone else means Mexican American. And as I got deeper into the kind of spiritual traditions of Chicanismo, especially through the work of Gloria Anzaldúa, a queer Chicana poet from South Texas. Um, I taught many courses on her, have written quite a bit about her. A lot of the publications in my background are related to her work and her ideas. I got deeper into the questions of indigenism or indigenismo in the Spanish-speaking world, and started doing a lot of work in American Indian studies, which I had begun in New Mexico, but took much more seriously and deeply in this period. I would say that was primarily the 2000s to the present in many ways, from the year 2000 to the present. Another area that you will see here has been media studies, and in particular digital media. And I taught a few courses in digital media. And I won't go over a lot of that. That'll come up as we're looking at the movies that we're seeing and the novels we're reading and so on. But the Campbell book signals another thread that grew out of my work in Chicano and indigenous circles, and that was shamanism. and questions about earth spirituality and so on. So I've been teaching for many years a course here, English 3100J, the J course, the composition course for juniors. The subtitle of that was Writing on Environmental Responsibility, I guess. I forget the exact title. And Sustainability, that was environmental sustainability. And so that's when I started doing work with the movie Avatar, because for me, one of the primary messages, one of the things that makes that an especially important movie is its message about our connection to the planet, our relationship as planetary beings to one another and to all the other beings on the planet. And we'll go into that to great extent. It doesn't mean the movie is without problems, however, and so in order to address some of those problems, as well as just out of interest, my children were especially excited about the movie Black Panther when it came out. So we bought a copy of it, became kind of a family infatuated with the movie. But as I looked at it, I realized in many ways it's another version of the storyline that's taking place in Avatar. And that might sound kind of perplexing or confusing or bizarre or even wrong to you right now, but I think you'll see as we go along more what I mean by that. And for one thing, what you have now in Avatar, you have what is often referred to in critical ethnic studies as a white savior motif. The main character is a white character, in this case an earthling, and I do quite a bit of that when we go through the movie, because it actually becomes a kind of multicultural conglomeration supporting this white supremacist imperialist power that now becomes extraplanetary, and so the corporations are completely in charge, basically as we see today on this planet, and it actually becomes a kind of multicultural invasion force from the Earth to the planet of what are, in racist terms, referred to as the blue monkeys. Nevertheless, Jake, even though he becomes sympathetic, just as in Dances with Wolves and Pocahontas and some other of these kind of so-called white savior fantasy films, turns to the side of the indigenous population, the natives, so to speak. Um, uh, in Black Panther, we have those roles switched. And so, in terms of representation, you have something very different. We're very much getting the perspective of T'Challa, for instance, and especially in the Black Panther. Uh, Here's one of my stroke moments here. The Black Panther graphic novels. Ta-Nehisi Coates is exploring questions that don't come up as predominantly in the movie because it's part of the Marvel action movie series. There's only a limited number of things they can do in a 2-hour feature. But in the graphic novels, Ta-Nehisi Coates has T'Challa exploring questions of not only what does it mean to be African, and that'll be one of the questions we're exploring. What does it mean for Ta-Nehisi Coates as an African American to be exploring Africanity? What does it mean for Coogler, the director of the movie, to be exploring these questions of African identity? And what are some of the questions, problems, and benefits of that perspective? Um, what we have is in the graphic novels, T'Challa exploring the questions and problems of being king, being leader, and how do you do that? How do you be respectful to the very traditions that gave you this position, gave you this power, gave you this understanding and connection to the ancestors, connection to the gods, and so on, and yet grow with the times, grow with an increasing demand among the people for a kind of democratization, a kind of political freedom that in traditional tribal societies was rare in that particular configuration. And you might even critique Coates's perspective as perhaps adopting, he himself says he recognizes he's adopting certain kind of traditional Western motifs as he's exploring the question of Africanity, leadership, and so on. Anyway, uh, so just before my stroke, I was collecting the material I'd been writing for the last 15 years before that, basically from 2000 to 2017, into another book collection which I had out to a publisher. It was going through some evaluation series, and I was doing some editing and so on, and then had the stroke. So that book came to a halt. But let me get the title. You won't be able to see this, but I'll take a look here because I forget the title at the moment. Okay. Yes. Healing the Continental Divides, a meditation on indigenism, Chicanismo, and planetary consciousness. So in many ways, you can see from the title, this is a kind of transitional work. It's when I started out with a much more explicitly political, anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, and in many ways anti-Western conception of humanity and so on into, and again, this in some ways was triggered by my work with Gloria Anzaldua's work, a more planetary consciousness, not strictly local, not strictly ethnic, not strictly um, national, far from national. I've been a critique of nationalism my entire life, basically. Um, and so Campbell, in many ways, speaks to that in ways that I think are important for configuring the questions that I think we will benefit from asking as we go through this material. And I'll have a lot more to say on that when I do the Campbell videos in the coming days. But basically, his notion, I posted on our Facebook page a quotation of his from, it's in the hero material, but it goes way beyond that, of follow your bliss, or in the Sanskrit term, Sit Chatananda. Or Sat, I mean Satchitananda, and as a matter of fact, I have a bumper sticker on my car from that says "Follow your bliss," and so we'll talk a lot more about that and the his notion of our human condition as beings in a dualistic consciousness, uh, constantly confronting the eternity of I mean, we are beings of time, constantly confronting the energies of eternity, is how he puts it. So I'll have a lot more to say about that in my videos about Campbell, which will be coming up in a couple days. So, a little bit about me again. As I said, I've been here for 20 years. I was in New Mexico for 10 years, off and on in Kansas. I spent some time in Finland. My wife is from Finland, and we were both living there a few years ago. Well, now it's about 7 years ago, but which also has another deep shamanic culture. And we've done quite a bit of research in Ireland and Scotland and so on at the ancient ceremonial sites, much on the of the nature of Stonehenge and so on. And I was born and raised in Massachusetts between Boston and Cape Cod. I was the last town before you're actually officially in Cape Cod, in a small working class town called Middleborough, Massachusetts, and went to college right nearby there. The closest college, in fact, Bridgewater State College, which is now Bridgewater State University, and graduated in 1980, then to New Mexico, and so on. I had a year in England as well, my junior year of college, living in London, which was pretty amazing. So here, here we are. So I'm looking forward to this, and what I found, to get back to the question of online versus face-to-face courses, is that in my experience, especially through some really good, really serious Facebook groups, ironically, even though there's a lot of criticism about Facebook out there, and a lot of it very well deserving, um, there are some very intense, intellectually, politically, spiritually responsible groups out there on Facebook as well. And it was through that coming to a sense of community in those groups that I realized, wow, yeah, this sense of classroom uh, rapport, community, and so on. There's no reason this can't be just as compelling through these means. So we'll be doing some group video work, some of it live. I haven't worked out all the technology yet, so I'll tell you more as I learn about that. And I guess I'll leave it at that. This is Wednesday, so that means it's January 16th. So welcome to English 2100. I'm looking forward to it, and I'll talk to you more soon.